Well, let's get more now on the coronavirus testing story. After a record number of new daily cases of coronavirus were recorded in the UK, nearly 13,000 people classed as being diagnosed in the last 24 hours. However, the government says that due to a technical issue, there was a delay in publishing a number of cases in England, meaning the total reported over the coming days will include some additional cases from the period between the 24th of September and the 1st of October. Well, joining me now to talk more about this is Dr. Duncan Robertson, a policy and strategy analytics academic at Loughborough University, who's focused on COVID-19 modelling and analysis. Good to see you this afternoon. What do you make of this error then?
Well, I mean, there's obviously something's gone wrong and it's not clear what that is. So we've got these extra cases that really don't belong in the last couple of days, but belong in the last couple of weeks. And we don't know whether these are a particular lab or a particular group of people. They might be university students, they might be care home residents. And so all the data we have is not really up to date and, isn't as reliable as it could be.
The Prime Minister this morning said that there was a computer problem and an issue notifying people. I wonder what he meant by that. I mean, do you think people have been getting the wrong results even?
Well, I mean, I can only speculate, but if people aren't getting their positive COVID results in time, then they're not potentially isolating and their contacts aren't being traced as well. So this is how the virus spreads out of control. And I think, we do know that not enough tests are being done. Your listeners will know that if they've tried to get a test, they might be sent a long way away. But the other thing is we can look at what's called the positivity ratio, which is the number of people who test positive as divided by the number of people who get tests. And that overall in these Pillar 2 labs is around 7%. And in particular locations, so Manchester is 13% and Liverpool's getting up to 15%. So that's 15 out of 100 people tested in Liverpool are testing positive. And the World Health Organization says that ratio should be about 5%, and anything over that is really saying we're not doing enough tests. So this is the major problem that's happening at the moment.
And yet we had the Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis, on Sky News this morning saying that the UK is doing pretty much more testing than anywhere else in the world. But if that is the case, then clearly there is an issue here.
Well, that's not the metric we should really be trying to get. It's not about testing as many people as possible, because what you really want is as little virus as possible, and then you don't have the requirement to test people at all, or very few people. So testing an arbitrary target seems not to be the best way of controlling the disease.
I'd be interested also to get your thoughts on these local lockdowns, these postcode lockdowns, as they're being called. The suggestion is that they're not really working. They've worked in Leicester and to a sense in Luton as well, although cases have risen again. But everywhere else that's under these extra restrictions doesn't seem to be beating the virus. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, you can restrict the virus and then you can encourage the virus. So we're, for example, university students are all going back to their halls of residence and they like to mix, and that's, great for spreading the virus. So, we need to look at this as a whole rather than just saying we're going to take individual measures. So I think it was the Deputy Chief Medical Officer talked about a coiled spring, and if you release things too quickly, it's going to sort of explode in your face. And we really need some sort of strategy or some sort of, overall policy about what are we trying to do and how are we going to do it.
So when you say that we need an overall policy, an overall strategy, would you say that a national lockdown of some form is the way to go rather than these regional restrictions?
Well, I think obviously there are parts of the country that are, where it's growing much faster than others. And then you might want to have, stronger restrictions in place. But if we, for example, where I live, it seems as though all that's changed is the pubs are closing an hour early. And then, of course, everyone leaves the pub and congregates after 10 o'clock. So, what are we trying to do? We're trying to keep as many people alive as possible. But we're also trying to protect the economy. And that's sort of, a very vague strategy to have. It's the sort of strategy you have if you're writing it for yourself, if you're a CEO writing it for yourself. It kind of suggests that the board isn't really paying as much attention to what's trying to be done as possible. So, what are we trying to do? And the other way of, trying to ask the politicians, what is the reasonable worst case scenario number of deaths that they're predicting? And if they can't answer that question, you have to sort of ask yourself why. So we need some sort of overarching decision as a country to say, what are we doing and how are we going to do it?
I suppose the government would argue that what they're doing, what their strategy is, to try and suppress the virus as much as possible before a vaccine comes, maybe in the spring or whatever, and taking these local hotspots and going in hard there in the hope that we can sort of suppress it enough. I mean, after all, we're not seeing a massive rise in deaths or in hospital admissions, even though they are going up slightly.
Well, this is what happens. And, you just sort of have to roll the tapes from 6 months ago at the end of March, where, cases were going up and people were saying, well, there aren't many people in hospital and there aren't many deaths. And that's because it takes time for you to contract the virus, to become infectious. And then, hopefully you don't, but you might end up in hospital. You might end up in ICU or high dependency units. And, sadly, some people die. So it's not a matter of seeing what the cases are at the moment and then reacting to that, because there's a whole backlog of cases that are coming through. And so even if we change the policy overnight, we're still going to get deaths and increases in deaths from policies that happened 3 or 4 weeks ago.
OK, lots to think about. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Duncan Robertson, Loughborough University. Much appreciated.